The new Basel Convention rule changes came into effect in January 2025. Is your business ready for it? Welcome to the Circular Future, your access to thought leaders and innovations to help you be a business sustainability champion, even if it's not your core job. I'm your host, Stephanie McLarty, Head of Sustainability at Quantum Lifecycle Partners, your trusted partner in electronics circularity. One of the recurring discussion points over the last many months has been Basel. No, I'm not talking about the Swiss city, at least not directly. I'm talking about the Basel Convention, which controls transboundary movements of hazardous wastes and their disposal. There has been a significant amendment that came into effect January 1st, 2025. So let's talk more about the convention, what the changes are, and why it's all important. Because even if you don't export or import electronic materials directly, you may still be affected through your supply chain. And as a disclaimer, I'm not a lawyer, so make sure you get professional advice on what this all means for your specific company. All right, so firstly, what is the Basel Convention? The Basel Convention was adopted in the late 1980s to deal with the international movement of hazardous waste. At the time, there was huge public outcry that hazardous waste from more industrialized countries were being dumped in developing countries where environmental regulations and enforcement were less robust. The convention was adopted in 1989 in Basel, Switzerland, hence the name, and came into force in 1992. Each country was then to sign and ratify the convention within their home country. Today, there are 191 parties to the convention. This includes Canada and the European Union, but not the United States. The US signed the convention in 1990, but never ended up ratifying the convention. And important to note, there is a trade ban between parties and non-parties for Basel-controlled materials, meaning parties who ratified the convention cannot export or import with non-parties for the applicable materials. The exception is Article 11, which allows for separate agreements, even between parties and non-parties, as long as the management of the materials meets the environmental standards of the convention. Under this Article 11 provision, there is a separate agreement. Under this Article 11 provision, there is a separate agreement for OECD members, or Organization for the Economic Cooperation and Development. And for example, there is a bilateral agreement between Canada and the US under Article 11 that has allowed for trade between the two countries for many years. Okay, so what now has changed? In June 2022, the parties to the convention agreed to add new control measures governing the international trade of hazardous and non-hazardous e-waste and e-scrap materials. These have come into effect January 1st, 2025, and are known as the so-called e-amendments. So among the changes, first of all, the definition for what is being controlled. The e-amendments have created new classifications for both hazardous and non-hazardous electronic products. These new listings include 3 categories for hazardous and non-hazardous materials. So firstly, whole equipment, secondly, components such as circuit boards, display devices, etc. And thirdly, fractions that result from processing such as shredding and dismantling. What's important to know here about the definitions, the convention now captures many products which used to move freely for recycling. So basically, your organization may be affected where you weren't before. Another change is that shipments are also subject to prior informed consent, or PIC or PIC, notifications, which basically mean exporters must obtain written consent from the importing country's government that it will legally accept the shipment. So you need to get written consent before sending a shipment. So basically an administrative change. Now, the implementation of these changes adds some additional complexity. It is actually up to each country the extent to which they incorporate the Basel or OECD control procedures into its national regulation. This is because consensus was not reached within the OECD framework. So you really have to look at each country and how they are approaching the changes. And even that has evolved. In November 2024, just weeks before the changes were to take place, the Government of Canada announced that it would not impose strict PIC notifications and permits on recyclable electronics imported from OECD countries like the United States for recycling. So ultimately, this decision maintains the status quo for trading with Canada. So why do all of these changes matter? There are many reasons to pay attention to these changes. Firstly, this may restrict export markets significantly, especially for non-Basel signatories like the United States. And even if this doesn't affect you directly, your supply chains may be impacted in terms of what materials they will accept, or pricing, or turnaround time, and more. And remember, it's not just about your direct downstream or even upstream vendor, but the entire supply chain beyond. Secondly, each country is responsible for implementing these new trade controls, so there may be variances from one country to the next, not to mention disruptions or delays that could be significant to your business. Thirdly, there may be more paperwork that your company has to comply with. This will just be a reality your business has to deal with. Fourthly, there could be indirect implications on certifications. For example, the R2v3 certification on responsible recycling, which Quantum and many companies have, requires compliance with all applicable laws and regulations. So if a company were to not comply with Basel, this may put their certification in jeopardy. All right, with all of these changes, what can you do? Well, firstly, educate yourself to understand how your company is affected, if at all, and keep up to date on any developments so you can be sure your organization is prepared. And also, talk to your supply chain and find out if the Basel changes will have a direct or indirect impact on your business. At Quantum, we're always happy to answer any questions. And remember, if you're looking for a leader in electronics reuse and recycling, we'd love to chat. Head on over to quantumlifecycle.com and contact us. This is a Quantum Lifecycle podcast, and the producer is Sanjay Trivedi. Thank you for being a circular future champion in your company and beyond. Logging off.